So, Six Underground is a Michael Bay film, a Michael Bay action film, a Michael Bay rated R action film where stuff explodes. I mean, like what more can we say with a film like this? I mean, I will say this though, it is refreshing to see Michael Bay do a more R-rated film. He used to do a lot more R-rated films back in the day. I mean, he's done some since, stuff like Pain and Gain. But it feels like, within an R-rated film, it feels like he has a lot more freedom to do just about anything he wants and just go berserk with the profanity and the violence and the over-the-top theatrics, all of that. And he does here. I will say, to this film's credit, it does deliver the overblown Michael Bay that you kind of want out of the director. It does kind of more or less play to his strengths. So the story is really, really, really simple. It's essentially Ryan Reynolds plays a character only referred to as One. He's in a part of this very secret organization of mercenaries who only identify by numbers. So it's kind of like, like the prisoner. It's like we don't tell each other our names. We just have numbers and designations. Now they set him up as sort of like a billionaire who wanted to basically keep his name off the books. Like he came up with all this advanced tech and basically just like, I don't want to be seen as a billionaire. I just want to go undercover and do cool spy stuff. And so he does, and he more or less plays the Ryan Reynolds that we've come to expect from Deadpool, especially considering that this was actually co-written by one of the writers on Deadpool, which doesn't really surprise me because there's a lot of kind of like goofy back and forth shtick here that you'd usually expect out of Deadpool, stuff that's very referential. Like at one point, him and his secret agent cohorts are going on a mission where they can't stop making movie references. They make so many movie quotations that just keep going up and up and up and up to the point where even Ryan Reynolds is like, okay, stop. Like, no more movie quotes. We've exhausted that, all of it. Which is a surprising amount of restraint for a Michael Bay picture. Because, I mean, Michael Bay restraint, it just goes over the top with its explosions and violence. And to the film's credit, I gotta admit, he does pull off some pretty amazing set pieces and stunts here. The only thing is, I feel like he kind of blows his load way too early in this film. I mean, the opening chase, or I guess the opening mission, is a big car chase that zooms all around the city, and cars basically, topple over things. They explode. They get ripped in half. They explode. They slam into buildings. They go through buildings. They go, I think they go up buildings. They slam into people on motorcycles. People get gored, eyeballs are ripped out. It's just over the top violence, and it's kind of, I gotta admit, I was kind of entertained by that first act just for the frenetic nature of it. I was surprised though. It did feel like there was a little bit more control in the camera. Like anyone who's watched Michael Bay films know he likes to jerk the camera all over around the place and get really crazy with the zoom. It's like that the person with the camera who discovers the zoom button and just goes crazy with it, just flicks it on and off. Feels like they might have taped the zoom a little bit here, but I get the feeling it's because a lot of these sequences are a lot more elaborate. The main plot it's really not that interesting. It's just like a big action set piece. There's some Middle Eastern country, I think it's called Turkestan, where they're trying to stop some evil dictator who's holding someone hostage and holding their people hostage and who's been committing acts of terror. And the group basically has to find this advanced tech and kind of out it. It's just an excuse for action set pieces. Like, even the film kind of knows this by kind of glazing over it. Like, they barely even talk that much about Turkestan for good reason. It's just a stand-in for whatever. It's just like standard placement, because let's face it, the heart and soul of this film is in its overblown action sequences and I guess some of the character interactions and comedy throughout, which again, some of it treads on territory that Bay kind of really stumbles into and doesn't quite know what to do with and can't really say much with it. But when it comes to action, I gotta admit, he does have some pretty damn good set pieces here. There's some pretty fun stuff here, like when they raid a penthouse at one point, and in order to make their way out, they basically flood the room with water. It's been quite a bit of time since I've seen like an action sequence where they use water. It used to be everywhere in like the 90s after like Titanic and stuff like that. Like they had an Eraser. So it was kind of cool to see a scene like that. There's some fun car chases. There's a lot of like parkour. If you're really into that, there's a lot of like scaling buildings and jumping across skyscrapers and hanging on to cranes and like just scaling these towering heights. Which I gotta admit, like technically, it's cool, but because the characters are so simple, I didn't really feel as much for what would happen to them. Especially since Ryan Reynolds' character really doesn't care that much either. I mean, it's basically like, look, the mission comes first, so whatever, if you get killed in the line of duty, you leave him behind. And then, of course, as the film goes on, he learns not to leave people behind, but more out of just, improving your moral compass than actual, like, character chemistry. It's mostly just the other character saying, look, don't be a dick, guy. Like try to actually like be more of a team player than just being all about the missions. Like, okay, and he eventually wises up by the end. And I think it sounds weird to say this, but I think the problem with this film is that the action sequences, they're for how elaborately they're set up, and there's some skill in setting them up like that. It feels like they just kind of like they wear on you. That by the time, I mean, there's so much of it throughout, like scaling towers and racing, having all these car chases and big violent shootouts and running across cities, that by the time we get to like the big set piece where Ryan Reynolds basically turns a huge yacht into a giant magnet so that he can slam everyone against the wall, and then of course everything else slams into them, like grenades and knives and bullets and stuff like that, which is, it's a cool sequence, but I feel like, after being overblown with so much of the other action, and especially because the action itself is carrying this more than the characters, we hardly learn that much about the characters. And when we learn when one particular character, who's actually played by a fairly notable actor, dies pretty early in the picture, you kind of realize, okay, well, some of these characters are dispensable, so how much do we have to be invested in? And don't get me wrong, they have some decent chemistry, but we really don't get to know them too much, which I guess plays into the whole secret agent aspect, I guess. Which I guess is kind of interesting that they maintain that, because let's face it, Michael Bay has never been the best at exploring characters. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like there should be a little bit something there so that we care whether or not these characters will make it out. Or at least if they... I almost kind of wish this film was more knowing, like kind of like breaking the fourth wall, where it realized it was a Michael Bay film. Because do you know how cool that would be if like all the characters knew they were inside a Michael Bay film, as explosive and crazy as this? Because Ryan Reynolds, they essentially hire him for the Deadpool role here. He's essentially making all the sort of like, crass bad boy remarks that we've come to expect from him in roles like Deadpool, that he really doesn't surprise with much character here. But I mean, like, if you're gonna go with like that kind of Deadpool, I would almost wish that he'd break the fourth wall more, kind of like maybe harp on like Bad Boys or something like that, or make fun of Michael Bay, or make fun of Deadpool or something like that, just anything like that. Because if you're gonna go for that crazy over the top type action film that makes lots of like smirking jabs, I feel like it's got to jab a little bit harder in that writing department. Because don't get me wrong, the action big, explosive, all over the place, and there's something kind of admirable about that kind of like freneticism that only Bay can weave so well. But at the same time, because I don't care about the characters, you just feel winded by the end, and it doesn't make it a bad film. It just kind of makes it an action film that could have used a little bit more character, just a little bit more concern, as opposed to just the more raw and visceral, violent and crazy cool, elaborate sequences of action that we usually expect out of Michael Bay. I mean, I kind of expected this stuff out of Michael Bay. I mean, it's what he does best. It's what he likes to do, and it's what a lot of people watch his movies for. You know, $150 million they spent on this film that's going directly to Netflix, and he uses all of it. At least visually, he uses it all very well. I got to admit that. But at the same time, I didn't really, feel much. Like when I think back to other action films that have been overblown, that try to, make the best with the material that they can. I think of stuff like, maybe like take like James Cameron. He also does big, elaborate action sequences. But if you look at something like True Lies, he actually spends a little bit of time to put some character in there. In particular, I liked how in True Lies there's a great character dynamic between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tom Arnold. They had a great back and forth, and you kind of cared whether or not he would make it out alive to get to his daughter or not. It's somewhat cliche, but Cameron establishes just enough there. Same thing with Titanic. We spend enough time getting to know the characters that by the time we get to the big action sequence, it means something, and we care about the characters. I don't really care about much of the characters in Six Underground. It just feels like watching a video game halfway through. A very nice video game with some great sequences, and it's fun to watch those sequences. But so much of it is placed on this very old lattice of having like a Middle Eastern villain who's like an evil dictator. Very standard action adventures type stuff that it feels like it's all like this. It's like all this like decadent frosting on top of this old dusty hollow cake. And it's like it looks cool, from like a very sweet standpoint, but then you dig down into it and there's not a whole lot there. There's no real central themes that are interesting to it, especially for people who had to leave their lives behind. You think there'd be something, maybe a little bit more to that. Not a whole lot. You'd think there'd be something just a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe I'm seeking too much from Michael Bay. But if anything, how about the writing staff of like Paul Winnick and Rhett Reese, who have written on stuff like Deadpool and Zombieland? I feel like they did such a good job giving so much character within even like Deadpool and Zombieland. They spent time enough with the characters where we got to know them and like them, as opposed to just making quirky jokes. Like, for as much as Deadpool broke the fourth wall, he had something to fight for. He had a history. He had a partner that we cared about. He had depth. He had character. Not a lot of depth here. I don't know. Maybe that's just the way Michael Bay likes it, but I can't help but feel like he has such a great grasp on action. I mean, he always does, that he just kind of turns in more or less what we expect. And after a while, the interesting visuals, which are also gory. Like the action here, I gotta mention, is over the top, violent, and gory. Like characters get shot up badly. There's blood all over the place. They get their eyeballs carved out. One person gets a grenade in the mouth and his head just explodes. There's lots of blood and guts all over the place there. Very gooey. All that stuff, fun, but somewhat empty when we don't really care too much about the characters. So I wish I could like this film more, because in that first act I was really digging the film, but where it went after that was just more... It was just kind of just more empty action scenes that are visually stunning, but at their core just kind of feel empty. So what can I tell you? If you like Michael Bay, just big and brainless, I think you'll have fun with the film. But if you're seeking anything more, which I guess in part is my mistake for thinking that there could be a little bit something more here, because I thought, R-rated Michael Bay, okay, you could $150 million, he can do what he likes, and it's coming to Netflix, so maybe he has more control. Turns out it's just kind of more or less the standard Michael Bay. Wish it would have gone a little bit more. Not the worst stuff he's ever done, but definitely not the best. So, for Six Underground, 2 out of 5 stars.